For many decades, the Soviet Navy represented a formidable challenge to NATO's naval dominance, primarily due to its fleet of heavily armed aircraft carriers. These ships stood out not only for their size and capabilities, but also because they were designed to operate without the need for a protective escort group. In stark contrast to their American counterparts, which typically functioned as the centerpiece of carrier strike groups surrounded by destroyers, cruisers, and submarines. The Soviet carriers came equipped with a vast array of onboard weapon systems. This allowed them to act with greater independence during their missions, projecting power and influence across strategic maritime regions. However, the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked a turning point in this narrative. With the collapse of the state that had funded and maintained them, these mighty vessels quickly fell into decline, victims of budget shortfalls, logistical complications, and shifting national priorities. Some of these carriers were eventually sold to foreign countries, where they continued to serve under new flags and with varying degrees of success. Others met a different fate, no longer valued for their military potential, but instead transformed for civilian use. Among these was the Minsk, a Kiev-class carrier that, after being decommissioned, found a second life as a theme park attraction in China. This transformation symbolized the end of an era, one in which Soviet naval ambitions once aimed to rival and even surpass those of the United States. In the present day, the Russian Navy operates only one aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov. This stands in sharp contrast to the Soviet period, when several heavy aircraft cruisers formed a crucial part of the naval arsenal and posed a serious challenge to Western forces. These ships were unique in concept and design, diverging significantly from the American model of a carrier-centered task force. Rather than relying on a fleet of escort ships for protection, Soviet heavy aircraft cruisers were themselves heavily fortified. They featured integrated missile systems, surface-to-air defense capabilities, and anti-submarine weapons, making them self-reliant platforms capable of conducting complex operations independently. The Kiev-class carriers, classified by the Soviets as Project 1143 Krechet, represented a significant departure from traditional aircraft carrier designs. These vessels were a hybrid between aircraft carriers and battlecruisers, embodying a dual-purpose role that emphasized both aviation and heavy weaponry. Only 4 ships of this class were ever built, and each bore distinctive characteristics. With a prominent starboard side superstructure and a limited angled flight deck, the Kiev-class ships departed from Western design norms. Rather than being referred to simply as aircraft carriers, they were termed heavy aircraft cruisers to reflect their multi-role capabilities. Their primary mission was to support the strategic operations of the Soviet Navy's ballistic missile submarines. But they were also equipped to perform a wide array of combat tasks, from intercepting enemy aircraft to hunting submarines and engaging enemy surface vessels. The Minsk was one of these remarkable vessels, named after the capital city of Belarus. Its construction began in 1972, followed by its launch in 1975, and it entered service in 1978. True to Soviet naval doctrine, Minsk was outfitted with powerful offensive and defensive systems, including 8 P-500 Basalt long-range anti-ship missiles and dual 76mm gun turrets. These features gave the ship significant firepower, reinforcing its status as a combat-ready warship capable of performing a range of naval operations. Initially assigned to the Soviet Pacific Fleet, Minsk experienced a service history that, while not marked by major conflicts, nonetheless reflected the strategic tensions of the late Cold War period. Like her sister ships, Kiev and Novorossiysk, Minsk remained active primarily in the Asia-Pacific region. The 4th ship in the class, Baku, also joined the fleet during this era. In the aftermath of the brief but intense Sino-Vietnamese War, Minsk was dispatched to the South China Sea in 1979. Her deployment signaled the Soviet Union's interest in maintaining influence in the region. The ship made several port visits and operational deployments, including a stop at Cam Ranh Bay in South Vietnam in 1980, a return visit in 1982, and a mission to the Indian Ocean. One of the most notable moments in Minsk's operational history occurred in 1984, when the ship participated in the Soviet Navy's first large-scale amphibious landing exercise. This operation, conducted in coordination with the Ivan Rogov-class landing ship Alexander Nikolaev and supported by North Vietnamese forces, showcased the increasing expeditionary capabilities of the Soviet naval forces during the final years of the Cold War. With the Soviet Union's disintegration in December 1991, the newly established Russian Navy found itself in possession of all 4 Kiev-class ships. But the economic and political turmoil that followed made it impossible to maintain such large and expensive warships. Minsk had already been withdrawn from active service before the Soviet collapse, following an incident involving a fire and subsequent technical problems. These issues were serious enough to warrant placing the ship in reserve, as documented in the 1993 edition of Combat Fleets of the World. Making the situation more complicated, the shipyards capable of conducting the necessary repairs were now located in independent Ukraine, effectively cutting off access for Russia. With no viable options for repair and a lack of funding, both Minsk and Novorossiysk were selected for disposal. In 1995, the 2 ships were sent to South Korea to be scrapped. While Novorossiysk was eventually dismantled by 1997, Minsk's fate took a different turn. Environmental activists in South Korea raised concerns about the shipbreaking process, leading to protests that ultimately delayed the project. Instead of being scrapped there, Minsk was sold to a Chinese firm, Guangdong Ship Dismantling, that initially intended to break her up for parts. However, plans changed, and rather than being reduced to scrap, the ship was eventually refurbished and opened to the public as a military-themed attraction. As for the other Kiev-class carriers, each had a unique post-Soviet trajectory. The original Kiev remained in Russia and was later sold to China, where it too was converted into a museum and tourist site. Meanwhile, Baku underwent a more dramatic transformation. After being sold to India, it underwent extensive retrofitting and modernization, emerging as the INS Vikramaditya. Now serving as the flagship of the Indian Navy, this vessel continues to operate today, standing as a testament to the adaptability and enduring legacy of Soviet naval engineering. Minsk managed to avoid being dismantled once again when it was resold to a Chinese company named CK Investment Company, Limited. This firm had been founded by a group of entrepreneurs who had made their wealth in the booming arcade gaming industry. They saw potential not in the ship's metal value, but in its symbolic and cultural capital. Purchasing the vessel for $4.3 million, an amount that would be roughly equivalent to about $7.3 million in today's terms, they quickly made public their real intention: to convert the former Soviet aircraft carrier into the central attraction of a military-themed amusement park. It was an unconventional idea, but one that immediately generated both curiosity and controversy. The amusement park, named Minsk World, was established in the bustling city of Shenzhen, located in China's Guangdong province, a region known for its rapid development and expanding tourism industry. When it opened in 2000, the park quickly garnered a reputation for being highly exclusive. Admission was more easily granted to individuals with connections, and for many ordinary citizens, visiting the attraction was not straightforward. At the heart of the park was the massive carrier itself, the former Soviet warship now repainted and refurbished. The hull bore the number 15 in a deliberate move to mirror China's own Liaoning carrier, creating a visual and symbolic link to the nation's growing naval ambitions. Inside the vessel, once secret areas such as crew sleeping quarters, command rooms, and missile bays were cleaned up and transformed into exhibits, allowing visitors to experience parts of the ship that had never been accessible to the public. To enhance the atmosphere, staff at the park dressed in mock military uniforms, giving the entire experience a theatrical, immersive quality. Performances and events were held regularly on the flight and hangar decks, including music shows and ceremonial displays. For guests seeking a more dynamic experience, there was the option to board a small motorboat and tour the starboard side of the ship from the water. Surrounding the main vessel was a wide selection of military aircraft and equipment placed on open-air display. These included various models such as the MiG-23, Mi-24 helicopter, MiG-27, Yak-38, the Chinese Q-5 Fontan, and several other machines and weapons from the Cold War era, such as the SAN-3 missile system, torpedoes, and the rapid-firing AK-630 guns. Interestingly, many of these aircraft had never actually been used by China's own military forces. Their exact origins remain somewhat of a mystery, but it is believed that they were acquired on the international market during the chaotic years that followed the Cold War, possibly through private collectors, arms traders, or other commercial channels. Even before the park officially opened, there were persistent rumors suggesting that the acquisition of the Minsk was not merely for entertainment purposes. Some speculated that the project had been a covert operation aimed at gathering intelligence or aiding the Chinese Navy. However, no concrete evidence ever emerged to support these claims. Alongside the military displays, the park featured exhibits that focused on Chinese military history, presenting a mixture of education and entertainment that appealed to a broad range of visitors. Minsk World was not a completely unique endeavor. Elsewhere in China, a similar attraction known as Binhai Aircraft Park was launched in Tianjin. This park showcased the Kiev, Minsk's sister ship, and offered similar displays and mock-ups for public viewing. According to marketing officials at these venues, part of the park's popularity stemmed from the fact that China at the time did not yet possess a functional aircraft carrier of its own. As a result, interest in these vessels was high, and visiting the parks gave people a rare glimpse of naval technology and strategy that was otherwise inaccessible. Even after China's Liaoning began sea trials, strict limitations on public access meant that these converted warships remained some of the only places where average citizens could explore the interior of a carrier. Despite the novelty and the early excitement, Minsk World struggled to maintain its popularity. Over the years, especially in the mid-2000s, the park saw a significant drop in attendance. By 2006, the situation had deteriorated to the point where the operating company filed for bankruptcy. In response, the Chinese government reclaimed the land on which the park stood, and Minsk World was officially closed that same year. On May 31, 2006, the once proud aircraft carrier was put up for public auction and sold for 128 million yuan to CITIC Shenzhen, a technology firm known for specializing in electronic communications. CITIC made a short-lived attempt to revive the attraction, reopening it under the new name CITIC Minsk World. However, this effort was brief and ultimately unsuccessful. The park was shut down again later that year, and the future of the ship was left in limbo. In 2013, the Minsk was acquired by a real estate development company called the Dalian Yongjia Group. A few years later, between 2017 and 2018, the ship was physically relocated to a man-made lagoon situated near the banks of the Yangtze River in Nantong, a city in Jiangsu province. Since then, the vessel has remained docked in that remote location as its new owners explored various ideas about how to repurpose or redevelop the ship in the surrounding area. Initial speculation suggested that the company might try to rebuild the theme park or turn the ship into a new tourist destination. The land around the lagoon consists mainly of agricultural fields and undeveloped terrain, and satellite imagery reveals signs of limited activity, such as an abandoned viewing platform and a large tented structure nearby. Despite the apparent groundwork, no actual progress has been made in terms of refurbishment, and no official announcement was ever issued explaining why the project stalled. While Minsk lies idle, its sister ship at Binhai Aircraft Park has continued to attract visitors. The management team there has ambitious plans to convert the Kiev into a luxury hotel, complete with presidential suites and high-end accommodations. By contrast, the Minsk's condition has steadily declined. It now sits largely forgotten in its isolated lagoon, about 50 miles northwest of Shanghai. The ship shows visible signs of neglect, with rust, corrosion, and damage becoming more apparent over time. No maintenance work appears to be ongoing, and there are no indications that the ship will be moved again. Despite its deteriorating state, the Minsk still draws a certain level of attention. Urban explorers fascinated by abandoned military relics have ventured onto the ship and shared videos and photographs online, revealing the decaying corridors, rusted control panels, and remnants of what was once an elaborate attraction. Many of the aircraft that once surrounded the ship remain in place, but are clearly falling apart, left exposed to the elements without protection or care. At present, the fate of the Minsk remains uncertain. Without any meaningful restoration or preservation effort, the ship's structural integrity will continue to decline. If no action is taken, the most likely outcome is that it will eventually be sold for scrap. The longer it remains untouched and forgotten, the more certain that end becomes. For a vessel that once symbolized the strength and ambition of the Soviet Navy and later became an unlikely amusement park icon, its current condition stands as a poignant reminder of how even the most powerful creations can be reduced to relics of the past.